Good evening or good day, depending on which continent you're on. This is August 12th or August 13th. This is our Critical Path, Buckminster Fuller Critical Path Reading Group and Study Group tonight or today, and we're on our way. Manu, how are you feeling and what do you intend to get out of today?
I feel good. I'm open. I'm grateful. And then ready to participate in everything that we do today. And what I expect is we'll read the critical path and then we'll look at it in the light of how we can apply what is in there to understand what is going on today and to plan and direct things that we do in terms of building anti-entropically our construct for a better world. That's my expectation. And how do you feel? What do you expect?
Thank you, Manu. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I'm not missing critical path. I was very concerned that by the time I got back, it will be over, so that for that, and looking forward for what's going to come up today. Yeah. So, Joe, how do you feel, and what do you expect to take away today?
I feel pretty good, and I'm excited to be here with everybody. And so, my expectation today is just to keep, working through a critical path. I think we really covered some very interesting ground pertaining to education and the banking system last week. So I think that this, I'm just looking forward to going into more detail on both of those issues. So, Steve, how do you feel? And what would you like to get out of today?
Yeah, well, I'm as excited to be back for my travels. Last week I was on the road between San Diego and Utah, approaching Las Vegas, and I had a great stay at my brother's house and then drove home, had a great weekend. I did my 60th year high school reunion. There were 50 of us there who were vitally cussing at each other and throwing bottles and stuff. No, we had a very calm and casual group. I met one guy that I was really glad to meet who lives right here in Utah. And I haven't talked to him for 25 years and he lives here in Utah, which is crazy. So that was cool. And I enjoyed what I could while I was driving of our discussion of Buckminster Fuller. His, Howard Zinn wrote a book about the history of the people of the United States of America. And I think it was Howard Zinn. And he wrote history not from the establishment points of view. And so he wrote it from the labor workers' point of view. And I think that Bucky has a unique point of view here in this whole thing. His whole point of view is, hey, we've got enough. Everybody is a billionaire. Every person on this planet is a billionaire in terms of resources. And yet there's a rich class and a poor class and a middle class. And Bucky, there was a pretty big middle class in the 80s in the US. But beginning somewhere around the late 70s, the middle class started to deteriorate. And now as the world sits, I think half of the capital in the world, or more than half of the capital in the world, is controlled by less than 1% of the people on the planet. And it's not about who controls it, it's about who shares it. Every dollar spent gets spent 7 or 8 times. And it's really interesting to see Bucky's turn on all this, because he approaches it not from who the winners are of the wars. He approaches it from what's happening to all these resources out there. How is it that in our economies in the world, we learn how to use less and less energy to produce more and more products, and yet the people aren't benefiting from that? Yep. That the savings is going into the pockets of the pirates. That seems to be his point of view. And as we read this, I'm amazed. There are things in history, like in our group, we discovered that the Chinese in 1833 decided that they didn't want to mess around with the Western culture anymore and just discontinued their worldwide trade. They burned their transport ships in their own harbors and just let their ships that were in Venice and different places around the world, just let them rot in the harbor. And the Chinese just quit the world. And I think that, and that's not the first time it's happened. I think we discussed it happened a couple of times. And so understanding that picture, you know, maybe the Chinese, for whatever better or worse they are, maybe they have some of the same awareness of Western culture that Buckminster Fuller had. And I just really enjoy learning about him and what's going on. And I'm so sorry I'm taking so much time with it, but it just seems with my introduction, but I'm just really excited to be reading part of this with you guys. And I love to have the different people sharing your, you know, you should share your experience. I think this is the right reading. Yeah, this is the right one. Hang on. Start here. Why aren't we there? Oh, we are there. I'm at the top of the page. There we go. Okay, good. We're going to start reading right here. We're actually in the Piggly Wiggly or Legally Piggly. These are the legal pigs in the section in the book, and it's actually page 95. And I was talking about that before with Joe, but we're actually on page 95 of Critical Path. So if you have your book of Critical Path, you can be reading along with us and follow along in your book and make underlines or do whatever it is you wish to do. So we'll go ahead and start here. Unfortunately, John Butler notified us that he wasn't going to be here. So unless somebody wants to read, I like rotating on our reading. So
I'll go.
you want to start?
I can get us started.
All right, really good.
Legally Piggly. In the depths of the Depression in 1932, when you could buy a meal for 5 cents and the finest of shirts for $1, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation went much further. It gave U.S. Steel $85 million worth of new rolling equipment in 1980 U.S. currency that would be close to $1 billion, et cetera, et cetera. The U.S. Reconstruction Finance Corporation had a secondary government machinery owning outfit that loaned all these prime contracting companies new equipment with which to fill their government orders. What the New Deal did, in fact, was to socialize the prime contractor corporations instead of the people. This hid the fact of socialism from the world in general. Socializing the prime contractor corporations indirectly benefited the people themselves. In this way, the New Deal seemingly didn't give money to the corporations, just orders. The USA established and financed RFC loaned the prime contractors all the money they needed to buy all the equipment. But in the end, the government rarely collected on the loans and finally just forgave the machinery borrowers altogether, selling them the equipment for very low nominal sums. The New Deal had also pledged itself at outset to take care of the forgotten man. The government voted minimum wage limits of substantial magnitude. The economy was going again. People were getting more and more jobs. How many depended upon how many prime contracts the government gave out. World War II was clearly looming ahead. The New Deal said we have to be prepared, and their preparedness ordering increased. Jobs increased rapidly, empty buildings filled. There were a number of great corporations whose businesses had practically stopped by 1933. But those businesses had now been set in healthy motion once more under the New Deal socializing of the prime contractors. Franklin Roosevelt said to the heads of the great corporations that had not gone bust, every one of you has a large surplus that you held on to in fear through the Depression. We want you to spend your surpluses in research and development of new equipment. Since the earlier clipper ship days, it has always been a function of a fundamental risk enterprise that the enterprise use some of its profits to buy itself new and better equipment, a new and better ship, which the enterprise that is doing the prime risk-taking by investing in the new equipment, thereby requalifying for the privileges and rewards granted by governments for wise risking, daring execution, and good management.
Let's pause right there.
FDR said, okay,
Well, we can finish this, Bear. I just want to talk a little bit about what you just read, Joe,
Sure.
because he talks about the fact here that the way when Roosevelt started his New Deal, we ended up with a kind of socialism. He says the USA's
for corporations,
here it is
essentially.
right there, right? What did the New Deal did, in fact, is to socialize the prime contractor corporations instead of the people. This hid the fact of socialism from the world in general. So, you know, the liberals argue that what's happening in the U.S. right now is that we're subsidizing businesses with, in various ways, with tax loopholes and different kinds of funding. And so we have socialized corporatism in America. We don't have socialism. And it's very confusing. And I think these facts here are very interesting. I wish I understood this better. That's just what I wanted to say. Any other comments or questions about this?
No, I mean, I'll just
Okay.
say, mention
Okay.
that he talked about essentially, and actually Manu mentioned it's the centralization of power and what is energy essentially. And that's what you're kind of seeing when you do that, when you give corporations social welfare versus actually the individuals, the people themselves. And that's something that we have. And we also, as citizens, we also take on the risks of these corporations as well. So the government is actually into the fact that they're de-risking the market for corporations because they become too big to fail. So
Yeah.
that's another issue that is, kind of what Bucky's kind of getting to. And this is the idea then, as Manu had pointed out last week, is that, yeah, this is not only energy that is in the hands of a few and pent up, but also the fact that if that energy should happen to weaken, we're all at risk. And so that we're left with picking up the tab.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here he's saying, go ahead, Manu.
I want to bring it to fundamentals. And that fundamental is the second principle of thermodynamics. Every system, in terms of having an output, has got to spend something. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is entropy. There is that energy, that part of the input that you spend into ensuring that the holding holds, that the structure holds. So every society, similarly, every system, social system, has to pay a certain tax in order to maintain itself as coherent going forward. But that tax is actual fact the people understanding themselves and taxing themselves for that purpose. That's what he calls here the fundamental, you call it the fundamental corporation. What was it again? The primary corporation.
Yes.
You have the right words here?
The prime contractors, yeah. He loaned the
Yeah, the prime
contractors.
contractors.
Yeah.
Okay. But obviously, that tax will be kind of benign and benign on average on society, concentrated on the prime corporation and for a longer time. And what happens is that with different government being more or less relatively short term, those subsidies become permanent, and they get into a tax system. And that is what is called depreciation. Now, depreciation, we know of it as in business as a phantom income when correctly applied. The tax loophole, right? So the question becomes this, to me as an individual, is that do you just concentrate yourself on knowing about these loopholes and leveraging them, that is, making use of them individually? Or do you really get back to the fundamental of why it was, and is it still necessary? And that allows you to see clearly into how it is today. I mean, today when you do depreciation, means putting aside part of your income for replacement and renewal of your productive assets, right? That's what it means fundamentally. But how is it applied in terms of accounting and tax today? That's an issue. I just wanted to put this on the table. Does it mean anything, or was that just rambling?
I don't know,
No.
you're going to fundamentals, and I'm still basking in his interpretation of what the New Deal was with Roosevelt. You're going to fundamentals, and I'm trying to understand what's going on up here in terms of Roosevelt's mission. And we're going to read a little bit more as we go. But you bring out an interesting point about tax loopholes being phantom income. I mean, I think you meant it in a positive way. In other words, if I get a loophole, I have extra income that I don't have to pay income tax on.
No, I'm saying if I'm educated financially,
Right.
I will know of those things.
Yeah.
And I will take advantage of them.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who's not educated, doesn't know the why, will not be able to.
Yeah.
We have a lot of entrepreneurs that have come up with ideas, doing things, but they dwindle and they fade away because they didn't have financial education.
That's a very good point. Most people don't understand how the financial system works and the idea even of depreciation. Even, how even things like school loans, these are things where you can't write off the interest for your school loans, you can't declare bankruptcy on them, but you can with other types of money. And I'd say that is just the way money works in general. I don't think people necessarily have an appreciation for I know they don't. And when you talk about the idea of how there's ways of generating income without really doing anything, that comes down to knowing the tax code.
Well, you're right. And
Let's take,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, let's take examples then and today. The modern example is Elon Musk. All Elon Musk space program initially was, how would I say, that was subsidized by NASA.
Well, was it subsidized by NASA, or was it built on orders received from NASA?
But that's subsidy. That is subsidy.
That's not a subsidy. If I have a product and you want my product and you order my product, you're not subsidizing me.
No. That was okay. Let's not go there. It was that technologies and things that have been developed by NASA has taken, applied, and given orders for that purpose. It could have been subsidized out to Russia or to other people. Now take the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and just take an example. I give a company an order or R1 billion loan as RFC. That company buys equipment, develops technology, and produces things that I buy. My loan is a 30-year loan. Interest only, very benign. 30 years later, I've forgotten about it.
You've forgotten
That
about
principle, I've forgotten about it. The principle is forgiven. And the same corporation that is private, now I've had the means to not only recover, because when they depreciate, they are recovering, they are putting aside on their income.
these loans weren't forgiven. Does it say
They are.
here that these loans were forgiven?
Yes, in the it's written there. At the end of it, you don't just recover anything. Did the New Deal recover anything? No. It's written there.
In the end, the government rarely collected on the loans and finally just forgave the machinery borrows altogether. Okay, cool.
Exactly. So you have socially financed corporations and the mechanism playing together with the political dynamics resulted into those concentration. I'm not saying that is bad, but that is just the reality, the way it's built. It is something dynamic. It is something that will happen, it will concentrate, and they will need to be redistributed all over time. It just waves going. That's my point. And individually, it comes to, are you educated about what it is or not? When you say educated, do you understand history? Do you understand the circumstances under which that was granted? Do you understand how it was granted? Do you understand how it evolved? And do you understand the result of it later on? And what do you learn from that in terms of you positioning for future?
Yeah. And most people don't understand any of that. Most people are just worried about getting their car fixed or whether or not they're going to get medical assistance this week, or are they going to buy dinner, or are they going to pay for? Now it's a rent crisis in America because properties have been purchased by banks. These hedge companies have come in and purchased property at too high a price, driving the market price up. Then they sit on them and hold them and they rent them and they drive rents up because they're interested in the rental income. We're living in a crazy time. Shall we continue to read? Or
Yes.
did you make your point clearly? Cool. You wanna
FDR
continue?
said, yeah, okay, I can give. FDR said for a little bit more. FDR said, we want you enterprises to modernize, but USA, the big corporate management said in unison, we won't do that. It is much too risky a time to use any of our surplus. They knew the oncoming World War II was forcing the government to see that their plants were modernized. So by holding out, they forced the government to take over both the risk and cost of modernizing. Heretofore, is that?
Yep, heretofore.
In the history of private enterprise research and development, more efficient new plants and equipment had been funded from the enterprise's surplus earnings. i.e. from earnings prudently withheld from distribution to stockholders to ensure the continuing strength of the enterprise. The then FDR's USA Treasury, with all FDR's lawyers' advice, ruled that the large private enterprise corporations could make their new plant expansion and equipment improvements and charge the cost to operating expenses, which expenses were then to be deducted from new earnings before calculating income taxes. I guess that's EBITDA. This amounted, in fact, to an indirect subsidy to cover all new equipment acquisition. The USA Treasury next ruled that all research and development, R&D, was thereafter also to be considered by the USA Treasury Department as an operating expense and also to be deducted from income before calculating income taxes. The USA thereby eliminated almost all the risks of private enterprise.
Let's pause
Next,
right
Henry.
there. Hang on. Let's pause right there. I want to tell you that as a small business owner in America since 1964, I was in a rock and roll band. I have, and then I got into real estate. I have benefited immensely from this strategy. That when if I buy a new computer, it's tax deductible up to $10,000. You know, if I lease my car and I use my car for business, it's deductible from my income. If I don't lease the car, if I buy it, I get a 52 cent per mile deduction. My auto deduction is the biggest deduction item I have on my income tax. And this is literally true. My operating expenses are deductible. So it amounts to, it didn't eliminate my risk, but I didn't have to fund my risk. Does that make any sense? I have benefited from this strategy. I've benefited personally from this strategy right here. And I think what he's doing is, what Bucky's doing is just pointing out the fact that, hey, this is a strategy and it eliminates the risk. If you remember, when he in the older chapters, he was talking about how the East India Tea Company were making huge amounts of profits. If they could get one of their ships to land full of merchandise, they made huge amounts of profits. And then they had created a shareholder deal so that if a ship got lost at sea, the guys who invested in it were protected by the fact that they weren't liable for more than what they put into it, limited liability, plus the fact that they got all the profit on the ship that did land in. And so he's talking about this balance in these economies of how the rich guys have always been benefited. And in this particular case, it benefited me. I just wanted to point that out because it sounds drastic, but this is how, my business thrived in America because of that. And I think that's one reason why America is so entrepreneurial. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. Any other comments or questions?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Can I go on or Steve or Joe?
You can go, Manu.
Okay, do you know two guys, one named Mike Tyson and the other one named Jay-Z?
I don't.
I do. You don't know who they are?
I do. Okay. Jay-Z and Mike Tyson. Okay.
Oh, Mike Tyson?
Yeah.
Tyson.
I thought you said Patterson. Yeah, Mike Tyson, the boxer?
Yes. And Jay-Z, the rapper.
Oh, okay, yeah.
What is the difference between the two?
One's really smart.
I don't think Jay-Z has bitten anybody's ear off.
And it's just.
No, not apart from.
I feel badly for Tyson. What?
Okay, Jay-Z is the billionaire. And Mike Tyson, relatively bankrupt.
Yeah.
Yet, Mike Tyson racked during his boxing career more than about $500 million.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe it's like $400 million.
Yeah, but he spent his money like a wild man.
Yeah.
No, the difference between the two, in my opinion, is that one is financially educated, the other one is not.
Yes.
And that's a lot of a lot of how would I call it, black athletes, black champions, black many things, because of that lack of education. I'm not trying to paint race here, but it's also real with artists in all these who are white. See, if you were smart, I mean, you are part of one minority or people in your industry that knew about what we are talking about.
You guys know the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yes, he's smart.
Arnold, he's smart. He
He's
came
smart.
to America. He came to America, and before he bought a house, he bought an apartment and rented it. Before he
Yes.
became a movie star, he was a millionaire in real estate in California. And so he could pick his parts, and he didn't have to do anything with anybody. He was very careful about the business he got involved in because he was smart. He was a millionaire in real estate. He was a
Yeah.
good business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is
go ahead.
and that is not smart of, say, it is something, how would I call it? Social IQ? Or emotional IQ, that's what it is. EQ, higher. He understood the game. You can't play a game without understanding the rules. And the rules of the game are based on certain principles.
Yeah.
And you can't play the game of life without understanding the rules of nature.
Yeah.
And how we apply those in our social settings.
Yeah.
Yep, that was my point.
Cool. Any other points? Okay, you want to continue?
No, yeah, sure. Next, Henry Luce, representing news publishers in America. The newspapers and magazines went to Roosevelt and said, "Your democracy needs its news. You have to have some way for the people to know what's going on." "Yes," said FDR. Luce went on, "We publishers can't afford to publish the news. The prices people are willing to pay for the news won't pay for the publications. The newspapers and magazines are only paid for by advertising, and the New Deal has no allowance for magazines or for advertising in its operating procedures." The New Deal then ruled that advertising was henceforth to be classified as research and development, therefore deductible from gross income as an operating expense before calculating taxes. Thus, advertising became a hidden subsidy for very great size, about $7 billion a year at that time. Hidden in tax calculation procedures, the subsidy was so great as to cover the founding of what has come to be known as Madison Avenue. While the government was doing all this, the Congress passed strict and comprehensive rent controls, bank loan interest controls, and price controls of every kind. It was pure socialism. It had to be done that way. There was no question. The Securities and Exchange Commission reforms removed I guess that's JP Morgan, it's supposed to be JR Morgan's, wait a minute, it has to be JP Morgan. Yeah. JP Morgan's two directors from the boards of almost every one of the USA's great corporations, except Henry Ford's, whose interlocking directorships had formally given Morgan prime control over USA industry. With the termination of Morgan's control of all the major corporation boards, such as those of US Steel and General Motors, these great corporation managements found that they were no longer beholden to JP Morgan and only to their stockholders. All we have to do now is to hold our jobs, is to make money for the stockholders. At this moment, the USA had evolved into a managerial capitalism in contradistinction to the now defunct invisible finance capitalism of which JP Morgan had been the master. We became noticeable I can't say, or what became noticeable at this time was the uniformity of position taken by all the great corporation managements in respect to actions taken by the New Deal. For instance, the great corporations across the board refusal to expand surplus on research and development. To discover how that came about, it first must be realized that the industrial enterprise underwriting and expansion financing of the private banking houses of Wall Street could not have been carried on without the advice, contract writing services, and legal planning of the world's most powerful and most widely informed legal brains. As a consequence, the corporation law firms of Wall Street, New York, were peopled with the most astute thinkers and tacticians of America, if not of the whole world. When the Great Crash in 1929 came and the events of the Depression occurred, as already related, and the great poker hands were called, and the New Deal had prosecuted the guilty and house cleaned the system and socialized the prime contractors. It was the Council of Wall Street Lawyers that governed the positions taken by the new self-perpetuating industrial giants managements. It was the former JP Morgans and other financiers' lawyers who now counseled all the as yet solvent big industry managements to guard their surplus and refuse to cooperate with the New Deal. Furthermore, the Wall Street lawyers could see clearly what the public couldn't see, i.e., that while the New Deal was unilaterally socializing the system, it was doing so without exacting any contractual obligation on the corporations to acknowledge the government's economic recovery strategies. The corporations gave no legal acknowledgement of their socialized status. It was clear to the Wall Street lawyers that without such contractual acknowledgement, the government socializing was a one-sided voluntary commitment on the part of the political party in power. Therefore, in fact, none of the big corporations had lost their free enterprise independence by accepting the enormous government rehabilitation expenditures. Since the Wall Street lawyers and brethren in other parts of the country were called upon to fill the Supreme Court bench, from which body they could determine the province of free enterprise, the lawyers reasoned somewhat as follows: a socialized system, as clearly manifest by the USSR, cannot tolerate free enterprise's freedom of initiative. There is no lucrative law practice in socialized states. Ergo, if we are to survive, we lawyers on Wall Street had best figure out how to go about keeping the fundamentals of capitalism alive amongst a few great industrial corporations that as yet remain solvent despite the 1929 and 1933 Depression events. The Wall Street lawyers saw clearly that it was those surviving corporations' undistributed surplus which certified that capitalism had not gone entirely bankrupt despite its banking system's failure. Operating invisibly behind the skirts of the as yet live corporations, the Wall Street lawyers that were formally but very seriously organized far ahead in time research and study teams consisting of the most astute corporation lawyers to be found in America. From these teams' realistic conceptioning, they formulated a grand strategy that would keep capitalism private enterprise alive and prospering indefinitely as run invisibly by absolutely legally by the lawyers. Oh, great. The latter's research discovered that they would not soon be able to popularly and legally overthrow the New Deal. It was clear that not until World War II was over might they find conditions suitable for unifying all the economic controls established by the New Deal. It is appropriate at this point to do some reviewing of evolutionary changes that had been transpiring in the nature of capitalism. Did I
It's
miss that
possible.
word? Untying? I did.
Unifying and untying.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Forgive
So-
me for that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I need to forgive you. So we got it so far, everybody? We ready to continue? Okay, cool.
That was a big difference with that word.
Yeah.
It is appropriate at this point to do some reviewing of evolutionary changes that had been transpiring in the nature of capitalism. It all starts with the land-based capitalism, a capitalism maintained by whoever sees successfully defended and controlled the land, ergo owned the land. Those producing food and life support on the lands were all subservient to and paid tribute to the great landowners. In land capitalism, whoever owned the fertile fields controlled all the wealth to be made from the land. Land capitalism dealt with nature's own metabolic productivity. Then private enterprise and finance capitalism came to discover what could be done with mass-produced metals to multiply the value of land-produced life support metabolics. In the 19th century, mass production of steel, for the first time in history, suddenly gave humans the capability of producing long-span beams, whereby they were able to produce large enough semi-fireproof and powerful structures to move and more wealth production to work undercover. Western world capitalism began to produce wealth undercover in addition to that produced out in the field, to make the tin cans in the factory to can the food produced in the fields, or to take the cotton produced in the fields and mass produced cotton cloth, became known as value added by manufacture. Value added by manufacturing was accomplished primarily with metals, metal buildings, metal machinery, metal tools, metal sea and land transportation systems, and oftentimes metal end products. And already mentioned, it was the new world around metals sources that brought about the name World War I. Suddenly, we had a completely new form of capitalism, which required both the large-scale financing and integration of metals, mines, and mine owners, metals refining and shaping into wholesalable forms, all to be established around the world by the world masters of the great line of supply. The world line of metals and alloy supply was essential in producing all the extraordinarily productive new machinery and that machinery's delivery system, as was the generation and delivery of the unprecedentedly vast amounts of inanimate energy as electricity. The new form of the world power structures capitalism by ownership of the mines and metals working all around the world. We call the metals and mining capitalism. Whoever owned the mines had incredible power, but never as great as those who controlled the line of their supply. Combining the two, one, the mines and the metals producing industry, and two, the line of supply. We have the world power structure that operated as the international world around integrated metals cartels. They were out of reach of the laws of any one country in a metals cartels capitalism. Combining these two with number three, the absolute need of large financing and credit at magnitudes rarely affordable by any one individual, we find finance capitalism integrating the world operation. At any rate, now understand why the 1914 to 18 war was canceled, or was called World War I. It was inherently a war for mastery of the world metallic resources and their world around physical integration, controlling and exploitation. The amount of metal productivity of World War I was so great that after the war, as the arms products became obsolete and were displaced by new design products, the metal contained in the ever vaster amounts of obsolete products began to come back into circulation as scrap. The scrap resources swiftly increased. The Morgan escaped managerial capitalist said, I'm going to keep my job if we pay our stockholder dividends. The rate at which we can pay dividends is directly dependent upon the rate at which, I guess that means which, our production wheels go around. To keep our wheels going around, we don't care whether we are using scrap metals or mined metals. As a matter of fact, the metals as scrap are usually more refined than the metals coming out of the mines. They cost less, so we're better off using the scrap, whether from obsolete buildings, machinery, armaments, railways, or ships. Formerly, Morgan had insisted on all his controlled manufacturing corporations acquiring all their metal stocks only from newly mined, refined, and wholesale shaped stocks. The mining companies found that industry would not buy ingots of their metals. They found that they had to turn their metals into tubes, bars, sheet, plate, wire, and a great variety of sizes and shapes. Wall Street's finance capitalism therefore underwrote the development of a host of metals shaping industries who were the automatic customers of the only ingot producing metals mining corporations. The post-World War I mine owner capitalists began gradually to be washed out of the game by virtue of the Morgan emancipated managerial capitalists saying, our job is to keep the wheels going around. Wheels going around producing saleable goods from scrap metals became strategic. Up to the time of World War I, the owners of the factories, Mr. Morgan et al., said, we put you in as management to make a profit out of this factory. If the management said, give us a new piece of machinery, the owner said, new piece of machinery, what are you talking about? We put you in to make money out of our machinery. You are fired. Oh, that's nice. Change was anathema to the JP Morgan type of financier. Scientists would come to Morgan and say, Mr. Morgan, I can show you how to make steel so that it won't rust, young man. And that's more, the more it rusts, the more I sell. How crazy you must be. Get the doctor to look this man over. He's obviously a lunatic. Take those mad papers out of his pocket and put them in my desk drawer. I'll keep going. But change was welcomed by the late 1930s managerial capitalism. New designs called for more whirling of their production wheels. The change which came in the form of many new armament designs for the clearly approaching World War II. The new designs released as scrap the metals from obsolete designs. Concurrently with the New Deal reforms and controls, the wage earners were now getting a fairer share of the national income. And the economy was prospering, particularly so the New Deal began officially to remember the forgotten man. Congress put a dollar seller under the wages and elevated worker earnings enough to produce a minor affluence and security for labor in general. Just before the USA entered World War II, the the Wall Street lawyers instructed the heads of great corporations to say, Roosevelt, we heads of the corporations of America were not elected by the American people. We were chosen by our stockholders. Our job is to make profits for our stockholders. At the time of World War I, a lot of business people were called profiteers. As we entered into World War II war production, we don't want to be called immoral profiteers. If you want cooperation from us, Mr. Roosevelt, you as a government are going to have to be the one to initiate our corporations being properly rewarded for our cooperation. Mr. Roosevelt said, I agree. You are beholden to your stockholders, so you are going to have to pay them dividends. Coping with this dilemma, the United States Treasury Department agreed that it was legitimate for the industrial corporations to make up to 12% profit per each product turnover. The New Deal said, we, the people as government, are, however, going to renegotiate with you all the time, continually inspect you to be sure you are really earning your profits. As a consequence of all continuous renegotiation by the government, those USA corporations earned an average of 10% on every turnover. This meant that in World War II, for every annual war budget running at first at 70 billion per year, 10% or 7 billion was earmarked for distribution to stockholders of corporations. Complete socialization of stockholders of the prime USA corporations was accomplished. That's disgusting. Amongst the prime.
Joe,
Yeah.
can we pause here a bit? I would like to hear your thoughts on all this, Can we pause here a bit? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot that we covered. So, I mean, what I could say is that we can kind of see this Morgan kind of profiteering kind of where they push and Morgan also, it should be noted, actually pushed Tesla out of business with Westinghouse. So it was essentially you start to see we talked about this last time, where the financiers were essentially taking over many of the car companies. Is that where we started? And we also spoke about the land ownership aspect of it as well, with the what was it, the Dust Bowl, the Dust Bowl drought in I forget what exact year, 34 I think it was. But anyway, what we're starting to kind of these are the details of how essentially JP Morgan in particular was able to basically he was more powerful than the president. I think it was I think it was actually before Roosevelt that they were trying to bring in a lot of antitrust laws with JP Morgan, but there were a couple of other points that had jumped out at me as well, and I'm trying to think of what he said. Oh, I think you can also see where you can start. This is the genesis of the defense budget as well, starting to take over. It's an interesting. I've been thinking about this the whole time. It's kind of interesting to see. We had our own centralization efforts going on at this time, not totally just but it was just privatized, and it was private corporations, and I don't think we've ever actually moved away from that. If you scroll up a little bit to where we were,
To where you continue reading?
No, to previously, because essentially we did talk about last week how the ideas of entrepreneurs, the people that actually created the business, that were actually not that had the ideas, were willing to put their blood, sweat, and tears into an invention. As you can see with JP Morgan, essentially he's telling them that basically their equipment, that their equipment is there to make them money, and in certain cases that even if it rusted, it would actually make them even more money because they'd be able to recycle it.
Well, I think his point, Joe, is not that they didn't want to recycle it. They were going to let the scrap rot because they were making
Right.
metal. And
They were making,
his business was mining, it wasn't recycling. So
it was both, wasn't it? I mean, from what I remember.
But
Yeah.
in Bucky's thing here, he said, let the scrap rot. We want all this stuff made out of new metal. That was the.
Okay.
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 And go find it if we want to be clear on it. But anyway, you're making some good points. So continue.
No, I think that's, you can also speak to the point that this is something where these are unelected individuals that are now running the country, that have an incredible amount of influence. And it's not transparent.
Yeah.
So I think with all the, that's something that still goes on today.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that was,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one other thing. It was, it did seem like, the things like the minimum wage came into effect, but that wasn't, nearly enough to offset what was actually going on at the top.
But it helped at the time, and the minimum wages lagged behind. I think one of the points, and I'm not clear on what I was going to say, but he points out that, I don't know, it had to do with what you were saying. I should have written down what I was thinking. But yeah, I was going to say what Bucky's pointed out in the past is the British Empire was being run by the East India Tea Company. And now what's happening is America is being run by JP Morgan and the financiers. So there's a definite correlation that he's bringing out there. And so, Anne, what were you noticing?
I think I just wanted to hear what your thoughts are, because this is the foundation of American finance, right? And of course, it's been copied all over the world. And it's really, it's something that we don't know about, right? Earlier on, you said that you benefited from the, some of the what do you call, parameters, put in place. And you're right. Actually, that one comes from people knowing the difference between pre-tax dollars and post-tax dollars, So business owners, they spend pre-tax dollars, which means if it's $1, it's equivalent to $1 that you actually get to use. And post-tax dollars, which is what most employees are spending, would be they are taxed first. So every dollar that they don't actually get to spend a dollar as a dollar, it's taxed first, then only they get to spend, right? So I think primarily that's one of the biggest difference between owning a business and being financially educated versus those that are not. But the one that I'm blown away by what actually went on, right? That 1, 2, 3 coming together, this took control of the finance of the country, and nobody can say anything about it. That's pretty horrifying in itself. And the other one is, we know of that. Why would you want to, save and get something that doesn't rust when you can rust and make money in perpetuity, right? We hear that, but to see it here, it's like they're in cahoots with the number 1, 2, 3, and with that, we can't win, right? And the last thing I just want to make a point is, because I was looking into the cost of education for about 5 years back, we got these numbers, of course, because US has got the most number of has got most data for us to use, right? In general, student loans in the US is now hitting 1 trillion. Okay, it's horrifying to see that students in the US are starting life already in debt, right? In debt. So how do you dig yourselves out of that debt? Because then it goes on and on. That's why people kept saying that today's economy is debt based, right? In Asia, the students are luckier because parents will be paying, for the children's education. A smaller number actually take loans for their children, but in general, the parents are the ones who will find the money to pay for their children's education. So we don't have that much of a problem. In countries like the Scandinavian countries, like places like Finland, they don't have any debt at all because the government will pay for as long as they want to study to as high as they want to go. So that's such a huge difference in terms of the starting point for graduates, in various nations. Yeah. But it is horrifying. Like in the US, what I'm looking at, the number 1, 2, 3, the student loans, and then now the next thing you're putting in is that the government actually ensures that this corporation has got 10% profit year on year, and here the rest of the business owners are trying to figure out how to make sure that they have profits, right? That is horrifying to me, right? And that's the base and the core of businesses, and people around the world are copying.
Yeah. Really quickly, I'm just to your point, Steve. Actually, the idea, it was the idea that a scientist would come to Morgan and say, "I have an answer to a problem, how to do something more efficiently," and he was like, "I don't want to do it more efficiently," and that's a way of suppressing innovation. So I mean, this is what happens sometimes when you centralize this type of, or give this type of power to essentially individuals that have no incentive to, in this instance, to improve their operations.
Yeah, you mentioned that J.P. Morgan was the one who funded Westinghouse in the whole.
He bought Westinghouse.
Huh?
He bought them.
Westinghouse.
Westinghouse backed Tesla.
Yeah,
and
was
Tesla.
backing, and let's say Nikola Tesla, to separate it from Elon Musk and what's happening today.
Right.
It was Nikola Tesla who was roaming in and out of those things. If you've seen any documentaries on the life of Nikola Tesla, I mean, he helped Edison. Nikola Tesla was really dedicated to human beings being in a better condition. And he ripped up contracts where he was owed what would be millions or even billions of dollars. He ripped them up saying, well, you don't owe me that. I mean, we're trying to make the world a better place. And so he died a pauper. And it was guys like J.P. Morgan who just laughed their butts off and took advantage of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, they won the Niagara Falls contract, and essentially then I think it was J.P. Morgan, if I remember correctly, I have to check this, was going to contest the contract, and Westinghouse didn't have the dollars to actually continue. And actually, in order to even continue and bid the Niagara Falls contract, I believe, yeah, that's where Tesla ripped up his patents.
Yeah.
And basically said, look, you don't owe me anything.
Let's get on. You don't have to pay me. Let's get this thing going.
But let's look at, I want to come back to what Anne was saying, our student debt. Okay, is the biggest yoke on our primary, how will I call it, asset today, the future with the youth and the people. Because if you look at it, taking the example of US, and the same here in South Africa is the same in many, many places, is the US government total asset is $5 trillion. About. The student debt in the US is 1.8 trillion. So that is about 40%. And that student debt was guaranteed by the government at large. Basically, that's why it is a government asset. So of a total asset of 5 trillion, 40% of it, and by far the most important, is student loans. So if you look at history, situations like this have always been resolved by some kind of jubilee. Are the governments ready for jubilee? And if there is any jubilee on student loan, what position will it leave government in? And to me, it is such an intractable problem today.
I agree.
The government went into spending at the expense of the youth, of the future generations. So how to solve that? That is, I think
That is
at least part of it should be forgiven. You know.
Yes.
I agree with that, but you have to solve the other side of the equation, which is the universities themselves,
Yeah.
which are charging. I mean, which are charging too much. So it's got to be a balanced and holistic approach to the problem. But I agree with you. I mean, I put a video in the chat. Who's somebody? If you look up his papers, he's written extensively as how student debt is essentially one of those things, one of the headwinds that are really coming, that are going to be something the United States has to deal with. His name's Robert Gordon. He's pretty well known. And so, but no, I thought this for the longest time. It's not only that you're punishing people for being educated.
But let's
And-
go. Yeah.
But I'm
Sorry.
sorry. No, go ahead. No, I'm done.
Finish first. I have this tendency. I have to correct myself, restrain myself.
I do the same. It's essentially, yeah, it's also it's putting a pressure on their purchasing power as well. So I mean, and it's also widening the haves and have-nots, because the individuals that can pay for schools, they're not coming out with loans, or they're coming even out with fewer loans. In which case, those individuals are at a huge advantage from those individuals that have to go into debt in order just to be educated. So anyway, that's just.
I was
I
going
have
to say.
Carry
I
on,
think-
Manu.
Yeah, I was going
carry
to
on.
say that is just part of a problem. The other part of a problem, and we'll have to put those things together, in my opinion, is this thing. You have the housing problem, right?
Mhm.
Because there was a lot of currency pumped into the market, right? The effect of it in the last 20 years has been to take the price, the relative price of real estate to a certain level that is unaffordable to most people. And the unaffordability hit first the youths. So you have a double sledgehammer, that is student debt and pauperization, to the point where you can't afford the basic kind of need of shelter. You cannot. It's out of your lifespan, if you look at it clearly. So the problem is this one. we bail out banks massively. Because what happened is that money was pumped into bank without the mark-to-market evaluation of a bank. That is, it allows the bank to dilute their bad debts with new money without changing the fundamental, without really restructuring.
Right.
Let's say I had a balance sheet that was 100, of which 80 was unsustainable from the liability side. There's 100 new money that is given me into that. So I have now a ratio of 80 unsustainable plus the 20 that was sustainable from the liability side plus 100, that is 120. So I have now a ratio of 80 to 180. All of a sudden, I'm painted healthy, isn't it? But the cancer is still within. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed. We should have done that on the people who can change, that is the youth, on reforming, as you say, education. Spending that money on that will fundamentally change things. Unfortunately, it's not in the interest of the big banks.
Yep.
So there's misallocation of the resources at the fundamental level. Okay. I'm through.
Yeah.
And was you.
Yeah, I have a question because, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was
Yeah,
just coming back to you.
Yeah, I have a question before you go on, because I just need a bit of clarification here. Excuse me. I was watching a TV series, and it's about, it's like a time capsule where they keep bumping back and forth over time and back in time, and then future back into the present and so on. So a lot of it was based on history, the American history, and they were going back and forth there. And in the series, the name Westinghouse came up a lot, and it was like this shadowy corporation, or at first I didn't know whether it was a person or a corporation, right? This shadowy presence that created a lot of issues in various times in history, and Westinghouse was around over a number of not even decades, it's centuries, yeah. And so it perpetuated until the present, where Westinghouse was still present, right? So most of American history that they went back and forth on, I'm aware of. Okay, I'm aware of, because we did American history when we were in school. But the Westinghouse never came up. So now that I'm listening here that you mentioned Westinghouse, so there it's an actual, because I thought it was fictitious, that they had this villain in the TV series, and that and it's a fictitious organization or corporation or a person, right? So now that the name Westinghouse has come up, do you have anything that maybe you can shed some light? Because over here, we're not familiar with Westinghouse.
Founded by George Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And they got into electric generation. And they actually backed Tesla, and they were, in a race against Morgan and Edison. And I think that, they didn't have the same resources that Morgan had. They eventually got into television at some point, but they were. He was near himself, I believe, also, but he had made an electric generator that would help bring power to cities, essentially, if I remember that correctly. He also got into things like elevators. If you walk into an elevator, you always see a Westinghouse elevator. but it started about 1945, 1950, something like that. And so it's an interesting story because he's not as well known as the Rockefellers or the Carnegies or the Mellons or the Morgans, but he was, he was a titan back in the day. So yeah, that corporation's morphed over the years. I don't know what it is now, but it was involved with CBS, the Central Broadcasting Station, at one point.
So they were the ones who backed Tesla and wanted to
Yes.
create something that was that is more sustainable and basically solve a huge problem in people's lives. Is that what you're saying?
Well, essentially, yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry, Steve.
Well, there are some really good documentaries on Nikola Tesla on YouTube. And if I've watched those documentaries, I think there was even one on Netflix. And as I've watched those, it shows how Westinghouse and Morgan and Edison and all these guys were jockeying. And I don't think anybody had any kind of a charitable or social commitment to improving the human condition except Nikola Tesla. The other guys, were all competing to monopolize and get first the big footprint on lighting Chicago and setting and getting electricity out of Niagara Falls. They're all more or less worried about building the value of their own companies. Nikola Tesla seemed the only guy who was really interested in giving free power to everybody. But probably Westinghouse was less of a shark than the other guys. I think that might be true. That sense of it.
Yeah, he was an inventor, at least from what I understand, as opposed to Morgan. It just, basically, I mean, Morgan's father was going to pull the money. I have to double check this. At one point, they were going to stop backing Edison because Edison, in order to prove that Tesla was that alternative currents were actually dangerous, that he created the electric chair.
Yeah, the electric chair is the most important elements of that documentary. It was Edison who created that to try and prove that Nikola Tesla there was something wrong with Nikola Tesla's inventions, and that electric chair created more pain and anguish for people and it was all Thomas Edison's doing. Wow. It had nothing to do with Nikola Tesla.
And he started to kill animals too. He was really crazy at one point. But essentially just to prove that alternating currents were actually unsafe.
Yeah. So,
but the other thing that was what was I about to say about it was something with Edison as well, that I think it was, and I don't know if this is true, but that Morgan's father was going to kind of pull the financing from Edison at one point, and then he died in a horsing accident over in England, and basically Morgan's son took it over and still kept financing Edison at one point. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that's what I had read at one point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, the documentaries around Tesla's life are really revealing because it talks about money and how it was developing and the advent of electricity and how it was revolutionizing everything. And Tesla's commitment was to give free power to everybody. In fact, he thought he could do it without wires at all, but that didn't support Morgan, who was mining copper. They were picking the technology that would reinforce their businesses rather than picking technology that would help the maximum number of people.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Steve. But to the part of Tesla intended to give free power to everybody, I don't think that's true. Yes, technologically, it could make power available everywhere by transmission using atmospheric charge, you know,
Right.
directing it. But to say that the aim, that social aim, I doubt it at all. He was a capitalist as everybody else.
I
And
don't
then,
think so. I don't think, I mean, I agree with you. You know, at some point you're right about that, but he wasn't a capitalist at all. That guy had no regard. He was more into geometry and numbers than he was into money. You know, he died penniless and he tore up his contracts that were worth at the time millions or billions of dollars. He just disregarded them. He really was trying to get power to everybody. And it took, after he died,
I wouldn't get into that debate. Let's, you know,
well,
it's a bit
yeah,
out of.
and I think there are people who idealize Nikola Tesla as well, but I don't know. I've studied a little bit about Nikola Tesla, and he left. You know, when he left, shoot, where was he born? Not Poland, but Bulgaria, Hungary. Yeah, where Slavia. He was Slavic, right? Anyway,
Yes,
yeah, he
was
when
a
he
Serbian guy.
Serbian, he was Serbian, and
Yeah.
and I don't know, Ben Franklin, Nikola Tesla, and Elon Musk. You know, there's three of a kind. They're the three musketeers. And I don't think you agree with me on Elon Musk.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying there is, on the one hand, entrepreneurship,
Yeah,
and the other hand, corporate.
right.
Right.
And the two is not the same. If you
Yeah.
confuse both at your peril,
Yeah.
is the same as, I think, enterprising anything or doing anything and ignoring your silent partner, which is government and the tax, is at your own peril. You really always need to be aware of that. That when you are starting anything in any social setting, there is government, and the government is your silent partner, whether you want it or not. You better be aware of it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It was I was wrong, actually. I put it in the chat. Westinghouse was much earlier than the 40s. It was actually in the 1800s, and I should actually known that because Morgan was in the 20s or in 30s. So I don't know how I got that wrong. Anyway, amongst the prime contract deal were all leading automobile companies. For example, Chrysler was picked out to produce the war tanks for their powerful position established with the government. The USA automobile manufacturers, on being asked to convert all their productivity to war armaments, agreed amongst themselves to put into storage all of their production tooling and to resume their post-war auto production with the models they were last producing at the outset of war. New production tooling would cost them several billions of dollars. They had their Madison Avenue companies grind out advertisements showing the GI soldiers saying, "Please keep everything the same at home until I return." Because Germany's, Italy's, and Japan's production equipment was destroyed during World War II, they were free after the war to start using the newest war advanced technology in both the designing and the production of their automobiles. That was the beginning of the end for the USA's prestige as the world's technological leader. The USA's post-World War II cars were inherently 7 years passé in contrast to the smaller, faster foreign cars. The big three American automakers undertook the manufacture while keeping the foreign cars off the market and while they themselves exploited America's market need for a geographically expanding economy's transportation. In the late 1960s, the big three automobile companies of America found that their distributors were disenchanted, but with decreasing financial returns and with frequent bankruptcy. To hold their distributors, GM, Ford, and Chrysler deliberately manufactured a few of their mechanically well-designed parts with inferior materials that were guaranteed to deteriorate electrolytically or otherwise. The replacement of these parts guaranteed that all the distributors' car buyers would have to return to them for service on a high frequency basis, at which time the distributor would replace the parts cataloged priced so high that the distributor was guaranteed a profitable business. This continuing deceit of the customers with the people was the beginning of the end of the American automobile business and can't see, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading out of the book. I was following. Pardon me.
My voice is not good for you.
No, you're.
I know.
Wait, I'm listening to you read, and I'm reading out of the book over here. I forgot about this over here. Go ahead.
Distributor with the parts catalog so side, the distributor is guaranteed profitable business. The continuing deceit of the customers with people was the beginning of the end of the American automobile business and the once great world esteem for Uncle Sam USA discreditation has been brought about without the USA's people knowledge of the money-making world's invisible cheating. Throughout all pre-World War II years, employers had maintained that unemployed people were unemployed because they were unqualified for survival, socially expendable. Then World War II saw young people deployed on war tasks all around the world. In view of this loss of labor, vast amounts of automation were incorporated in the USA's home front war production. With war over, the government found the cream of its youth all unemployed. And because of the automation, there were no jobs in sight. Because there were proven cream of the youth, no one could say they were unemployed because they were unqualified. So the as yet operative New Deal created by the GI Bill, which sent all those young people to prepaid college and university educations. By World War II, and labor was earning so much that for the first time, it was feeling truly secure, affluent, and successful. Emulating the pattern of the rich, individuals of labor were becoming little capitalists, with many enjoying the realization of their own home and land with two shiny new post-World War II cars in the garage of their kids going to college. And some savings in the bank. That has changed in America. The workers began buying the shares in IBM and other super promising private enterprise companies. The US Wall Street lawyers, being astute observers of such matters, realized that this labor affluence had brought about a psychological reorientation of the body politic. People no longer remembered or felt the depression of spirit that was experienced in the Great Depression of social economics following the Great Crash. The Wall Street lawyers, grand strategists, saw this as the time for breaking through the New Deal hold on government, an event which, up to that time, seemed impossible. The lawyers said, whoever can get the victorious Supreme Command American General of the World II, as their candidate for president, will be able to get the presidency. They captured Eisenhower. Eisenhower had no political conviction one way or the other. His vanity was excited at the idea of becoming president of his country.
Okay.
The Wall Street lawyers,
I was a big fan of Eisenhower as president, and I think the last thing he had was ego. I think he really was a humble servant of America. And when he left office, he gave his famous military industrial complex thing. I don't know why Bucky would say such a thing about a guy who I studied in junior high school and supported as president in 1954. I like Ike. My mom was a Republican and she worked at Northrop Aircraft, and he was a hero of World War II. So why he would say his vanity, that bothers me. I mean, maybe he was, but I mean, he was best suited, and and
I agree.
he complained afterwards that the Dulles brothers and others, that this military industrial complex lied to him on occasion. And JFK, John F. Kennedy, when he took over, he was lied to. And that's what the Bay of Pigs was, and the whole Cuba thing. So that bothers me. We can read a little bit. We can read one more paragraph. Anybody else have anything to say? There's going to be a little bit more about Ike here. So
Never trust by an individual.
My
Never.
what?
Never trust one individual.
So you're saying my faith in
I've heard Elon Musk, I heard Eisenhower, I've heard all of these things. Never. You have to have equanimity to your proclivity towards being attracted by those strong poles.
I agree.
You really need to have
I'm a
clarity.
economist, but I'm going to
See-
give Elon Musk and Eisenhower the benefit of the doubt.
No,
Okay.
it's important. You need an ecosystem that is going to keep you in check, because nobody can keep themselves in check. It's true.
And have you heard the
And there
latest
is,
about- Go ahead.
you have to be vain to run for president. I don't care. I agree with you. He's the best he's the least of he's the best of the worst, but I don't know. Anybody that puts their face out there to go run for president, it has to be
Wait,
something wrong with it.
take Eisenhower and Bernays.
And who?
They are contemporary, aren't they?
Who?
Edward Bernays.
Edward
heck?
Bernays.
Yes.
The Madison Avenue dude, Bernays?
Yes, the advertising guy. When was he out?
You're
The
doing
whole
polar opposites,
story-
right? You're doing
Yeah.
opposites. Okay, good. Phew, I was
So
going.
the whole story is that the people, what you call the middle class, the American, that was made of GIs. They were unqualified. They were given by the GI Bill a certain leeway into something. And that's actually the beginning of the educational problem that we have today. Because GIs were subsidized, but the kids were not subsidized.
And so what happened
So
was
they were used to a system that could not be sustainable from generation to generation. Second thing,
So what you're saying is that because there was a GI Bill and because all these guys had money to pay colleges, the colleges started taking the money in and they became corrupt. And the
yeah,
college
not that. I don't use the word corrupt. I'm just saying this.
I'm going to use corrupt. I
Money-
think the college
Money
system-
was allowed to be accumulated with people who have no financial education. The people who thought financially and who had a vested interest, that is Wall Street and all these things, they fashion with their law, like the product that is attached. These people are now little corporate, little capitalists. They can buy, shares of companies. And the geniuses, between quotes, as Bernays, their job was to corral these people, unbeknownst to them, into buying en masse those things.
Yeah. Thus we have
And thus, all of that,
Yeah, we have
Yes.
Virginia cigarettes poisoning America. Yeah.
and all of that resulted into the problems that we have today.
Yeah.
You don't know history, I repeat again, you are doomed.
Well, yeah. And education should be free. Thomas Jefferson said so. All the great American founders had free education because education is key to keeping a democracy rolling.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 10:41. It's probably time to wrap it up.
I think we can still read because we only 3. We only 4.
You want to
Alright.
finish that?
Let's finish that paragraph and then wrap it. I'll suggest.
I'll go along with that. Let's go for it.
The Wall Street lawyers explained to Eisenhower the prevailing new psychology of affluence and convinced him that the new affluent majority would elect a Republican. Thus, they successfully persuaded him to be a Republican. With the healthy economy and the new wage earner capitalists with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo readily voted for Eisenhower on the Republican ticket. Eisenhower Wall Street lawyer managers explained to him that he had been able to win the war because of the vision, courage, and ingenuity and the productive power of American free enterprise. They convinced Eisenhower that the USA is in fact free enterprise. They also convinced him that the Democrats' New Deal was socialism and therefore the inherent enemy of free enterprise.
Okay.
Let
me see.
maybe we'll do another one or do one more.
Well, yeah, it's 42. If we're willing to run a little bit late, that's good. There's 3 more paragraphs, and then there's a new section. So if you want to read,
All right,
3
let's
more,
do this. Let's do that real quick. As soon as the Wall Street lawyers had Eisenhower in office in
you don't have to read
1952,
quite so fast, Joe. You can slow down just a little bit. Don't rush through it. You're okay. Go ahead.
okay, they instructed him to break loose all the economic controls of the New Deal. They had him cut all price controls, all rent controls, all interest rate controls. They had him terminate anything that was stymieing the making of big money by big business. For instance, they persuaded Eisenhower to allow the insurance companies to invest their vast funds in common stocks. This is a big deal. Before Ike's liberation of the insurance companies, they were allowed to put their funds only in Class A bonds and similar investments. Cheered by the capitalist's own sector of the press, his Wall Street lawyers' advisors for a long time had Ike feeling like a great liberator. The Wall Street lawyers' grand strategist put the Wall Street lawyer John Foster Dulles, in as Ike's Secretary of State to dictate American foreign policy of Soviet containment. And Foster Dulles' Wall Street lawyer brother, Allen Dulles, was put in as head of a new brand of absolutely invisible U.S. financed capitalistic welfare department, the CIA, established ostensibly to Cold War cope with the secret agent operations of our enemies. So secret was their operation that the people of the United States and its congressional lawmakers had no idea of the size of the unlimited funds given to the CIA, nor for what those unknown funds were expended. The CIA and Allen Dulles had a USA signed blank check for X amount of money to do X tasks. I call the CIA capitalism's invisible army. The great USA corporations, having been saved in 1933 by being only unilaterally socialized, and having in the subsequent 15 years become powerfully healthy from enormous war orders immediately after Eisenhower's election, started escalating prices. Their logic was that the first corporation had to increase prices in a given field of production would be the first to be able to distribute, upping as profits to his stockholders, and thereby to gain for himself greater economic management status and personal wealth.
Really good. Manu, how are you feeling? And what's your takeaway today?
I feel good. I feel that I've learned something. I feel grateful for all the genuine and ardent participation of everybody on this call. And I think that, I don't know how Becky wrote these things, but they are so relevant today. It's like, a fictitious description of some futurist event that will happen. Because if you look at what we live in the world today, this fits in giving a clear explanation of what is at play perfectly. I don't know if you guys have the same feeling, but what I take away, it is important. And I had the impression that I had read Critical Path, but it's like I never read anything, because this discussion just unfold some of the things that were in there kind of hidden, and that shed a bright light on how I see things today. And that's my takeaway. And how do you feel? What do you take away?
Okay, I took away a tremendous lot, and so it's such an eye-opening moment. Two things, what you just said just now, that was really powerful. The other one is, Manu, earlier you said, when you pointed out the GI's education being free, and it kind of set a practice, or this belief that the way to becoming wealthy and successful is through education, right? But what the big difference was is that their children's education is not free, but parents are throwing so much money in there, not realizing that their children are not going to be able to get to that wealth the way that generation did. So I think that is powerful. And the other one is, I just realized, what, we cannot teach economics and business education without doing Buckminster Fuller. It has to be included in the education for all business studies in universities and colleges, and whoever is studying, whether it's even at school level. Well, I think I can do something about that, because the minute I am able to take over a university here to run it, to lead it and run it, I think this is one of the things that's going to change. I just came back from Bali as well. Just last night, landed at 12 o'clock midnight. With what's happening in Bali for our school is crazy, because now we are working with very young people in Indonesia who want the change of education for their country, not just their kids. And so yes, the past few days I was with developers in Bali itself, and they're high-end developers, so they've looked at a lot of education systems, but they were not comfortable with them, but they're very comfortable with us. So we're going to see how that goes. And part of that land, they're going to they want a university. So let me see what I can do about this. Yeah, this is crazy, crazy powerful what I just got out of today. Okay, so Joe, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today?
I'm grateful for everybody here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to read. I very much appreciate Anne, you calling on me, asking me my thoughts, because I have to be able to consolidate my thoughts a little bit more clearly, and that really is helpful for me personally. So I'm personally grateful for that. I have to get a little bit better spotting that one part about the scrap metal. I was a little bit, I just was moving too fast and didn't focus. So that I need to get better with that. That's two of my takeaways. So those are personal takeaways. I think this book is going to get really interesting. There's a lot to unpack here and a lot to question. The idea of price controls has been really studied, and it'll be interesting to revisit what works and what doesn't. This time period that Bucky's talking about is seen as the 50 glorious years of America, where everybody was actually doing well. And as it said, that regular individuals were now able to invest into companies and to partake in some of the some of the benefits that come along with investing. But that 50 years, that 50 glorious years wasn't necessarily sustainable. It's unsustainable to think that you're always going to, he even said it, something about an automobile for your kids now. And that was interesting in the sense that if you're going to have a 2-bedroom house, you're going to have a 4-bedroom house, then what are you going to have, a 6-bedroom house? It is the idea that it's always going to get, you're always going to have more and more for the United States. This continued level of growth is something that is sustainable. And I think that that's an interesting thing that we're going to probably be able to discuss a little bit about. I think there's also this interesting part about how maybe we transitioned from defined benefits to 401ks is also something that's going to be, we may not get to that, but because this, kind of maybe this book wasn't written with that in mind, but that's an interesting thing to discuss as well. And the impact that had on markets and individuals' lives. So there's a lot of, this is a really, really interesting point in America. I think that there were some things that were really beneficial, like the GI Bill, where we're educating people for free. But I also think that there were a lot of mistakes that, obviously the United States made. And I think, kind of going into those mistakes and understanding them and being able to follow up with our own analysis about this stuff is really going to be cool. And I'm glad and honored that everybody here is willing to spend their time with me going through it. So Steve, how do you feel and what are you taking away from today?
Well, I'm really excited today. I'm really excited because I've always talked about Benjamin Franklin and Elon Musk, and now I'm going to put Eisenhower in there too. And Nikola Tesla. I'm going to have those 4 guys. So I really enjoy the challenge from that Manu has put upon me here. I'm gonna I really bumped because I just bumped my phone, and I wanted to read. I stuck it in the post over here. I stuck it in the thing. I'm going to read this. I also put in, because Eisenhower at the end, he cited the Dulles brothers as being liars and cheats. And they were the biggest problem. When he got into office, they lied to him and created some major freaking problems. So, and I put in his military industrial complex quote down in here, but I want to read this one because I think it's really important. This is from Eisenhower, my favorite president. Every gun that is made, every warship that is launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers and the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense under the clouds of war. It is humanity hanging on the cross of iron. This is Dwight David Eisenhower. This is my president. So I'm very excited that I got to share that quote because a lot of people don't know that quote about breads and bullets and bread. And his quote on the military industrial complex, which was basically Dulles, the Dulles brothers, pulled the wool over Ike's eyes and promoted a Cold War. When JFK came in, he caught him in their lies and he was going to shut down the CIA, and they shot him. And new documents out. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. he quotes a great book that goes through everything. When the Warren Commission did its analysis, they weren't allowed to look at any CIA records. There are still over 5,000 pages of CIA documentation on the murder of Kennedy that is still being withheld after all this time. And so the CIA has been doing some bad stuff. There's a really cool book. In fact, I should find it and stick it in the credits before I go, called Addicted to War. It's a graphic novel about American CIA involved in taking over banana fields in Guatemala, turning over democratically elected governments, and this war machine that Eisenhower talked about. So I got my blood going today about this Eisenhower thing. Now, nobody, nobody is all pure saint. Nobody is. I don't trust anybody. I trust a person to be exactly who they are. And you never can tell what that's going to be at any given moment. But I'm really glad I got to get on a soapbox here and rant for a few minutes. I'm also excited that when you say that you see Buckminster Fuller as a curriculum for a course in economics, I think that's really a profound idea. There's another book by Howard Zinn. Have you heard of that book called The People's History of the United States? That's a great book. Before I leave tonight, before I turn off you can all go, I'm going to put a link to that book, Addicted to War. I'm going to stick it down there. And I'm also going to get a link to Howard Zinn, The People's History of the United States, because that's what we got to start looking at. And I'm excited. I'm excited that Buckminster Fuller gets my blood going. I'm looking at history in a brand new way. I love it. And I'm sure grateful for you guys being here.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun, actually. I think that this.
But yeah, Steve, when did General Eisenhower say those things? When?
About the bulletin bread, I'm going to find out the exact date. I know when
You
he
will,
did his military.
you will see that is towards the end of his 2 terms.
Yeah, that's
He
right.
became president in 1952.
Oh, I thought it was 54, man, from my memory.
No,
So it was
52. He had 2
59.
terms. Kennedy
Okay.
became president in 1960. So he became president in
Yeah,
1952.
I was going to say 56, in fact. And so I said 54 because I knew it was before 56. So that makes right. 52 and then 56. He was reelected in 56.
So secondly, note that his daughter or him and Nixon were their son and daughter were married.
And so,
And Nixon was vice president. And what does Nixon represent?
everything bad.
Lying.
I'm not saying so. Not again, I don't want to stereotype. But I'm just saying what Becky is saying here. He said President Eisenhower didn't have any political or
So-
ideological proclamation. He was
Right. He was
a technocrat. He was a
That's
guy, and he thought about his interest. Because even the military industrial complex, even if he thought it, he declared it publicly at the end when he was transiting power to Kennedy. That's when he declared it. But he never made it public. Never before.
Until the last day. Exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think if I were president, I would do what they say as well.
That's what I said. Never believe, never just follow a person. Try to know what are the powers, what are the forces at play.
Look who's around
That
them.
is education.
I am
And
so
take
glad
the
you
risk.
told me that, Manu, because I was prepared to follow you. But now I'm going to take your advice and I'm not going to follow a person.
No,
Don't follow
don't follow
Dan.
a person. Because I always say that something I say today, I can come next week and
Exactly
disclaim.
right.
Yes, that's the way I am.
Yeah, me too. Okay, you're my heroes. And I think, Manu, you said it, nailed it on the head. You've read this book before, but somehow reading it with all of us looking at it, there's more coming out.
Mhm.
And I think that's
Yeah.
profound. So thank you all for being here.
It's really going to be interesting to look at this through a lens of kind of trying to reimagine too what traditional economics is telling us and what is possible.
Yeah.
We can't disregard the past,
Right.
but we could definitely improve upon it. And this will be a lot of fun. This is an important part, I think, in at least the industrial age of economic thought. I think a lot of things that happened during this period, America's paying the price for now. And actually, if you look at the very interesting link that one link I put in there where you could pull up all the world economies and see what essentially they depend upon for exports, that's really worth playing around with. It's it's run by Harvard, and it really is one of my favorite sites to just go to and to look around, and it shows you how imbalanced sometimes the American economy is. I'll just put it back in there.
Is it the heat map that you should?
Yeah, where you could do any country.
But
And-
something really interesting, it really puzzling me, is how, because whatever book that you take of Buckminster Fuller, it's just amazing. I mean, we look at the operational manual, we look at the Grunch of Giants, Critical Path. If you take cosmography or whatever, it is just always mind-blowing the way he describes things. And I can, but to think that it's because he is a generalist, an informed generalist, and he knows about the general principles. That's how he can frame from any perspective in a way that it sounds clearly in the general rules. I don't know if you had that impression, but we're talking about economists here. This guy has never been described as an economist.
No,
Mm.
he
But
just
the way
yeah,
it bring things, makes you think.
makes you think. He honestly, he's just like this is more like a researcher, just talking about even how the papers couldn't necessarily report the news and how that was important, and how that evolved. And I thought, I'm going to be really interested to hear what you guys have to say about price controls, because that's an interesting area. I don't know how I feel about them. Or rent controls, because they do create shortages to a degree. But anyway, I'd love to know what you guys think about that.
Maybe EI is going to be able to do it impartially, without emotion.
Well, that's actually there's a lot of people that believe that AI will be able to figure this out. And actually there was a project in Chile back under Allende, Project Cybersyn, that tried to predict the prices of goods. They just didn't have the information, and then even the information they got was distorted, because essentially the way U.S. trade policy was essentially, basically they weren't trading with them, but they also prevented them from not getting loans. So it kind of distorted their market. Anyway, it'll be cool to go through this.
Well, it will be cool. Now, I want to just caution Anne that
Yes.
some people consider Bucky a quack. So, if you do decide to, and I put in there a link to People's History of the United States of America by Howard Zinn, because he doesn't do the corporate approach at all. And I also put in there a book called Addicted to War, which is a graphic novel, which you can get used for $1.50, that talks about the CIA's involvement screwing up democracies all over the world, which is exactly the fulfillment of the of Eisenhower's statement about the military-industrial complex, and further evidence of what happened in JFK's demise. So we're living in great times. This is a great time to have this discussion, and there are alternative views. Milton Friedman is not the only economist on the planet.
No. No. But it's been the prevailing wisdom since the 1980s, though.
Yeah.
And I think it's gotten us into a lot of trouble as far as the government is seen as a backstop for a lot of gambling. I'll just say
Milton Friedman, Malthus, there's a new day coming. So Anne, be at the forefront of that and kick some booty.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yes. Okay, you guys are my heroes. I
Yeah.
wouldn't-
Poor guy.
This is
You
what I
guys
want
are
to
my
know.
heroes.
It was very
Yep.
interesting today. I don't know if you have the feeling. It was really interesting.
It was so much fun today. It really was. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, even going back over like the Westinghouse mistake I shouldn't have made. But that was interesting as well.
Okay,
Joe,
my-
Joe is not a mistake. Don't, you know, it's a
Yeah.
mistake, but take a mistake lightly. That's
Yeah.
healthy. Because I didn't even notice it. You are the one who went back and say, hey, by comparing these dates and that, is not in the 40s, it is probably in the 80s, late 80s, or beginning of the 20th century.
right.
So that is really very intelligent in my part.
This is a study group of friends, not a we're not conspiring experts. We're all
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also very surprised usually when y'all pull out dates and names and information. So for you to get it, like maybe not accurate, that's fine, because most times you guys get it like spot on. I'm like, yeah, so fantastic. I love it.
That's
No worries.
intelligence. That's not something else. So no,
If you didn't make any mistakes, Joe, I wouldn't trust you.
That's good. Yeah, that's.
It'd be fake. Somehow you'd be
Well, let me
fake.
tell you, I'm one of the most trustworthy people that you'll ever meet. Then.
Benjamin Franklin, Elon Musk, and Joe. Biden.
'Cause,
Yeah.
no, Elon Musk is a great guy. He takes
Okay.
big positions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not. No, he's
Yeah,
a fellow. He's a
See,
fellow South African man. Hey.
That's right.
That's right. That's right.
That's why he can never be president of the United States, is because he was born down in Manu's country.
Yeah.
Unless we have an amendment. So.
Okay.
Yeah, we won't have that. We would have got
No.
it for Schwarzenegger. If we were going to have one, it would have been Schwarzenegger. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Peace.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Talk to you. Bye bye.